Wright's law, also known as the learning curve or experience curve, is an economic principle that describes the relationship between the cumulative production volume of a product and its end production costs. Wright's law states that as cumulative production doubles, the production cost per unit decreases by a consistent, obvious, measurable percentage. That's what's happening right now in China. No one seems to be paying attention, except some people, like Paul Foss. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. I'm the Electric Viking. Great to see you. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to all the new subscribers. It's actually fantastic to have every single one of you. Welcome back, everyone else. I'm right here now in Thailand. If you're new to the channel, just to give you an idea on who I am, what I'm doing here in Thailand. Why am I here? I sound like I've got an Australian accent. Well, I hope I do, because I'm from Australia. Well, I'm here now because my wife is doing stage 4 cancer treatments. Stage 4 is meant to be the incurable cancer stage. The clinicians that we saw in Australia basically didn't give her much chance of surviving for very long. So we have sought some alternative treatment, which is actually very expensive, but it's absolutely been working. And I've only been able to do this because of the people who watch this YouTube channel, because of them actually helping us afford this treatment. So if you want to know more about that, I'll put a link in the description to our GoFundMe campaign. Once again, thank you so much for all of your support and your donations. The concept of Wright's law was at first observed by Theodore Wright in 1936 when he analysed the manufacturing costs of aircraft. He found that with each doubling of the total units produced, the average unit cost decreased by a certain percentage. This observation became known as Wright's law and has since been applied to various industries beyond aviation. In fact, it's actually a concept that holds true to almost every consumer product that you know and buy today. The underlying idea is, as production volume increases, organizations gain experience and improve their processes, leading to cost reductions. Now, Sandy Munro, who I've quoted many times on this channel, says one of the problems for mainstream legacy automakers is this: a lot of them don't seem to apply the principles of Wright's law. I mean, for example, he worked at Ford and General Motors. He was one of the people involved with improving, or at least trying to improve, the production processes at Ford and General Motors. He said he would be there on the weekends, improve production efficiency on some of the production lines. The main managers would be back on a Monday and they would tell him off and put everything back the way it used to be. This is one of the problems of being an existing automaker who loves to do things the way that they love to do things in their certain exact ways. Big companies have certain cultures and they can be hard to change. But if you're a new company disrupting an old one, and you have a first mover advantage, you have a production advantage, then Wright's law most certainly will apply to your production costs. This cost reduction can be attributed to factors such as economies of scale, improved efficiency, technological advancements, and learning from previous production cycles. Now, right now, unfortunately for legacy automakers, they're pretty much ignoring, well, at least in most part, have been ignoring Tesla's use of Wright's law. This principle has, of course, applied to Tesla. How on earth are they in a position now to be making a profit when they were losing billions of dollars only a couple of years ago and everyone was saying they go bankrupt? Well, they had to implement principles from Wright's law. They did. We all know what they are. I'm sure you do. If you don't, there's thousands of videos on this channel talking about the principles that Tesla has used to change their methodology, their production practices. Are people paying attention to them? They are. But unfortunately, for the Western world, the majority of those companies, in fact, almost all of the companies that are paying attention to them and implying and actually trying to use their principles exist in China. BYD, structural battery packs, right? A number of other automakers, structural battery packs. You know what? When everyone heard about Tesla using gigapresses, massive pressing machines that enable Tesla to reduce about 100 parts down to 2 or 3, well, Chinese automakers, their ears pricked and they said, hang on a minute, where do we do that? How can we do that? In fact, 6 different Chinese automakers ordered gigapresses from the company in Italy that makes them called Hydra within a matter of months. It's now been several years since that information has been public knowledge. How many mainstream automakers have actually gone and said, yes, that's a good decision. Let's do that? 0. That's how many. That, my friends, is alarming. Wright's law has been applied in many different fields. This doesn't just apply to vehicles. It applies to batteries. It applies to battery packs. It applies to many of the production parts that go into an electric car. And it has implications for predicting cost reductions and price trends as industries continue to scale up production. Now, if you're one of the legacy automakers and you're not making many EVs right now, Wright's law doesn't do a whole lot for you. You need to actually use economies of scale to start bringing your costs down. And that's why these big automakers, you're probably hearing it from Renault, from Stellantis, you're probably hearing it from Carlos Tavares, you're probably seeing it when you hear about Ford making a loss of $20,000 per car or Xpeng making a loss of $16,000 per car. Clearly, right now, legacy automakers are all making a loss on the electric cars they sell simply because they don't make enough. They haven't had the time to actually enable Wright's law to start working for them. Now, of course, it's important to note that while Wright's law provides a general pattern, it is not a precise mathematical formula. Every company will be affected slightly differently depending on how they implement its principles. The rate of cost reduction can vary depending on various factors, such as industry characteristics, competition, technological advancements, whether or not they see what their competitors are doing and try to reiterate and do it better, and market conditions. And that's the key here, market conditions. Market conditions in China, they are horrendous right now. It's a bloodbath.
Auto industry consultant Michael Dunn warns China is determined to bend the electric car industry in its favour.
The size of the market alone makes China an irresistible place to be for any global automaker. If you're not in China, you're not playing. So China says, how badly do you need our market?
Many people aren't aware of the fact that most legacy automakers make, well, more profit and more sales, did in the past, in China than they did in any other country. All of that's changing very quickly. And automakers from China, well, they want to get out of China too. They're starting to sell their cars overseas. I just made a video showing you that now China is the world's largest exporter of cars, period. Not just electric cars, just automobiles in general. This is alarming because China's rate of automotive export has actually quadrupled in the space of 3 years. Quadrupled. That's a 400% increase in exports of Chinese cars in the space of 3 years. If they continue at this rate, China will own about 70% of the world's auto market within 10 years. That could be what you might term a monopoly. So Paul Voss says, and if you don't know who Paul is, you should Google him. Put on a Google update on your phone for his articles because he's one of the few journalists who's actually paying any attention to what's going on. Most people just see, there are heaps of good journalists out there, I don't want to say that, but most people are just seeing what the here and now, the today is. What's the smoking gun today? Who had a car crash today? What can we say today happened? Was there a fire? Is something that's slapped you in the face? But really what we want to look at, if we want to understand what's really going on, is the future of the automotive industry. And that, my friends, I believe is what Paul Voss is doing. So what does this mean, he says, for the automotive industry? It means that electric car prices will continue to drop dramatically over the next 4 doublings in volume, which will be by 2028 to 2030. If you do the maths, 0.85 times, 0.85 times, 0.85 times, that predicts a 48% reduction in the price of electric cars. Now, it's not just Paul saying this, by the way. It's even the CEO of companies like Volvo. I mean, we've got major CEOs saying, yeah, actually, this stuff's pretty well true. EVs will be cheaper within 5 or 6 years than gasoline-powered cars. Now, Paul says that possibly because of stricter emissions and safety regulations, the price of cars has been going up around 4% a year over the last 5 years in the United States, with his above prediction of about 8% a year reduction in electric car costs, and assuming that the 4% increase in internal combustion engine vehicles continues, that predicts electric vehicles will be 12% more price competitive every single year. Now remember, we're not mass producing electric cars yet. There's a long way to go. There's lots of cost advantages to be achieved within the next 5, 6, 7 years. These estimates could possibly even be conservative. And that's without considering factors such as cost of ownership, which continue to decline constantly. On the 13th of January, Tesla reduced the price of its cars in many countries around the world. And Paul says that the point of Tesla's refreshes with the new Model 3, the Highland, and the new Model Y, the Juniper, is actually more about improving cost efficiency and production processes. And you know what? I think Paul is right. Remember, around about 4-5 months ago, Tesla China sent 150 engineers from their production lines to the factory in Fremont. What was the purpose of those engineers going from China to Fremont?
Now all of the technology and design engineering is concentrated in China. How do you catch up with that?
Well, I think Paul is on the money here. He's saying it was to improve production processes, to remove costs, to find out how they can more efficiently make those vehicles. So Tesla can continue to do what? Bring down the price of electric cars and still make a profit. Legacy Auto right now is saying it costs them around twice as much money to make an internal combustion engine vehicle versus an electric car. Well, that's a big problem because that doesn't apply to Chinese automakers. They're making EVs at around cost parity with an internal combustion engine vehicle already. Where will they be in 5 years' time? How will Wright's law apply to them? Well, it will apply probably even more so, because when you are in a situation where all of your competitors are cutting prices, you have to find ways to improve efficiency. You have to think damn hard, and you have to pivot constantly in order to just stay alive. There's been automakers within the past 7 days in China, one electric automaker and one internal combustion engine automaker, that have just gone bankrupt. The other companies are seeing this. They're seeing thousands of dealerships shut their doors, and they're thinking to themselves, are we next? What do we have to do to stay alive? Paul says that in Europe, who are way ahead of the US in converting to electric vehicles, with 20% of its current sales electric cars, well, that presents some massive problems for European automakers. Well, one of the problems is this: they have their doors wide open. There are almost no import taxes on Chinese electric cars. So the Chinese are sending their EVs now en masse to Europe. This avalanche has literally just begun. And there's a lot of people in Europe starting to freak out. They're getting very scared, for good reason. The two big problems for traditional big sellers in Europe, like Volkswagen, Toyota, Mercedes, BMW, Peugeot, Audi, Renault, Ford, Skoda, and many others, who are all electrifying their cars, but at relatively high costs and prices, are that Tesla and the Chinese manufacturers such as BYD and others are making electric cars at much lower costs, since they have a lot more experience making them, and they make a lot more of them. As an example of that, BYD has launched 3 different models in around 12 different European countries. Tesla sold 50,000 Tesla Model Ys in the month of March alone. That's a European record. No other automaker has sold that many cars of a single model in a single month in the last 10 years in Europe. But Paul says this, right? If you thought Europe was moving quickly, China is a completely different ballgame. China is moving even more quickly, with 33% of its new vehicle sales currently electric cars. But the problem in China is greater than it sounds, because there is literally millions of cars right now sitting around gathering dust because, well, they aren't wanted. Seriously. I mean, there's literally 4.2 million cars right now in China, brand new ones, that aren't selling. They're just sitting around in dealerships. Guess who makes those cars? The majority of them are made by legacy automotive companies. And in 5 months from now, most of them won't even be allowed to be sold. They'll be illegal because of China's emissions regulations. China has been warning these car manufacturers now for about 5 years that these new emissions regulations would come into place. They were meant to be enforced around a month ago. China said, okay, we'll give you 6 more months. 6 more months to dig yourselves out of the hole you've put yourselves in. Now, is 6 years not long enough for these automakers to say, we better change what we're doing? There's some new rules coming into place. Well, clearly it wasn't. Who knows why? They simply ignored China's warnings. That means the majority of those cars won't be legal to sell. But even worse than that, the majority of the cars being produced by legacy automakers in China right now won't be legal to sell either. Without spending or investing billions of dollars into new emissions technology, those cars will simply be obsolete. Those factories producing them, basically mothballed. That's what will happen. As you can see, the manufacturers that have been sitting on their hands, or worse, lobbying against internal combustion engine vehicles. They've been trying to stop people from buying them because they've seen this writing on the wall. You can kind of see why they'd do that now, can't you? Well, it's going to be bad for them, really, really bad. They've already lost enormous market share so far this year. In the first 4 months of the year, Japanese automakers' sales on average have fallen by 40% in China. Well, now investors in Germany are starting to panic as well, throwing cakes at the head of Volkswagen Group's chairman at their investor meeting the other day. Why? Because they see this flood of cars, this flood of electric cars, which are quite good products, coming to Europe. And they're asking Volkswagen, what are you doing about it? What are you doing? Volkswagen have really nothing they can say. So what does this all mean? It all means it's playing out pretty much how Tony Seba predicted. And he's been predicting this now for over a decade. In fact, Tony Seba was probably the only person who got this right. He predicted that battery costs would decline at a staggering rate. And he got it almost exactly correct. How this guy knew this in advance. He said the price per kilowatt hour of batteries would drop from around $500 just over 10 years ago to $100 today. Well, he was pretty much spot on. Now, disruption is slow in the early stages. However, when disruption hits a tipping point, and that tipping point is at about 5% EV penetration, that's when adoption shifts from early adopters to the general public and quickly goes to 80% or 90%. There's a number of automotive CEOs right now, big ones, saying this is happening quicker than anyone realizes. By 2026, the game will be over. Well, if we'd all thought, if someone had told you right when Nokia, Ericsson, and BlackBerry were the 3 most popular mobile phones in the world, that none of those brands would be even relevant in only a couple of years' time, you would have laughed at them. Apply those same principles to the automotive market. Apply those same principles to companies with enormous debt levels. Nokia, Kodak, and BlackBerry, none of them had the $200 billion of debt anchoring them. I mean, imagine this. You're a ship. You hang an anchor off the side. That's called $200 billion in debt. And car factories making the wrong product, the product that people don't actually want anymore. And then tell me how fast you can really move. How fast can a ship anchored move? That, my friends, is the current situation of most automakers in the Western world. Unfortunately, when you're anchored to the bottom of the sea, there's just not much you can do. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching. Bye-bye.